everybody. Hi. It's been one of those weeks, hasn't it? It is interesting when you get into fall, when we get past Labor Day. The first week is, oh, we're back. We're back from summer, and then the week after that, it's, oh, okay, it's getting a little. And now we're in that phase right now where it's starting to get a little bit nutty, and that's okay. That's okay because that helps us finish the year strong, heading into 2024 with a lot of confidence. Clearly, I was teaching yesterday. I'm Doug Zanger, editor-in-chief of Indie Agency News. Started my first class at Portland State University, Intro to Advertising. So very proud to be back in the classroom. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that sometime down the road. First of all, I would like to take a moment to NPR style thank our corporate members who have joined us. Indie Agency News is designed to be primarily, as in vastly, majority member-led. So being member-led means that we want to operate successfully so that we can continue to bring things to you that matter. And we want to be member-led. We want to hear from you. We want to build with you. We want to grow with you. Our brief is very simple: building the global home for independent agencies and serving the brilliant people behind them. Our current Wall of Fame members, I just like calling it a Wall of Fame. I think it's kind of funny. The Burns Group, thank you so much to Joe for dipping in way early. PBN out of Seattle, Raven Public Relations, and our friends at Walrus as well. So thank you to the corporate members and to you individual members starting at $10 per month. Thank you for your support. There will be no coffee mug with the logo on it. So why did I start this thing? Well, partly because I just love it, but part of it too it's with the people that I've had a chance to work with, had a chance to know over the years. One of whom I'm bringing onto the stage right now, David Greiner, my former editor at Adweek. Somebody asked me about Uncle Advertising yesterday in class. They said, "What does Uncle Advertising mean?" I said, "Well, David Greiner is known as Ad Dad, and I'm like his older brother, the one that shows up like maybe with a good edible, maybe with some mostly decent advice, but sometimes some sketchy advice." So that's where it all came from. So David, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here, Doug. Good to be back collaborating. I'm sure it's been a minute, like a year and some, since we did podcasts together and everything else together. So it's great to be back with you.
I know. And when you were doing the podcast, I subbed for you once. And one of the comments on the podcast was, "I don't know who this guy is, but he sucks. Bring Greiner back." So thank you for that, listener.
Oh, that was me. Sorry.
Was it? Okay.
I like to reinforce the brand.
I'm sorry about that. That's so dead on. One of the things, so before Adweek, I was at the Drum. And when I look back at some of the work I did at the Drum, obviously very proud of it. But when I got to Adweek, one of the things that you worked on with me in particular was, you said, yeah, you're a good writer, but you could work on your headlines. And when I look at the time that we spent together, that was something that we consistently worked on. And people don't seem to realize how deep we would go into some of that. And you were telling me stories about when you and Nud would work together. We would spend hours. Sometimes we would try to work on a headline and say, you know what, let's just table this until tomorrow and figure this out. But I want you to go into and we'll get into the presentation here shortly, but I want to set this up with, talk about the importance of a strong headline. I think everybody intuitively understands that, but really talk about the impact that it genuinely has.
Yeah, I mean, like to put it in, a product perspective, your headline is your packaging, your headline is your branding, your headline is everything that's out there for the public to decide whether or not they want more of what you're selling, right? So whether it's copywriting for marketing content, digital content that you're putting out for a brand, journalism, in the case of Doug and myself, I think the challenge is the same for writing a really effective headline, which is coming up with a way to use the most valuable resource people have, which is their time, their attention. What are they going to spend time, clicking on and reading? And you got to nail that. And I think a lot of people can probably identify with this is that it's the most important part of you. You can spend months working on one piece of content, one article,
Right.
whatever it is, and then people will try to throw together the headline at the last second. And it's just, you would never do that. You would never spend years designing a car and then like a month before it goes to market, be like, we should probably figure out what it looks like on the outside. Like, you want to really put, not to say as much effort in, you don't want to spend months on a headline, but you also don't want to just take the lowest hanging fruit and say that works and then push it out at the last second.
One of the things that I work on with clients on the consulting side is that a headline can, to your point, be the front door of it, but it can also be an organizing mechanism, because that's really a critical thing. So I remember you used to tell me, what do you want to really convey in this? The headline should reflect that. And then you'll write it and it might change, but at least you're starting with something that's going to help you get organized. And we'll get here to your presentation here in a second, but address that real quick and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, and that's something I don't really get into too much into this deck that we're going to walk through today with my headline writing tips. But I do think is a really important thing to think about is that it's really easy. Again, if you wait till the last second, if you put off a headline and then you come up with sometimes the biggest problem is you come up with a great headline and you're like, but this article isn't that. And what you've done at that point is make clickbait, right? Like if you have a better headline that you can't really fulfill, you've created a good headline, but you've created clickbait. What you want to, what I think people get really uncomfortable about is like, oh, I wish that's what this article was. And I think whether you're a journalist or a content, strategy marketer, like that's a good time to take a step back and say, well, maybe that's what this content should be. Maybe I rambled too much. Maybe I tried to cover too much ground in one piece, which certainly Doug Zanger was guilty of a few times. Like, you can carve that out into 3 pieces of content and no one will complain. Like you can get specific. And to your point, I think writing a headline or at least concepting a headline early enough in the process will help you structure your thinking so that you're not wasting time just spilling down a bunch of different corridors.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Me, self-indulgent? Do tell. A couple things here. So the question that always comes up. So number one, please do ask questions. Can't promise we'll get to them, but throw them in the comments on LinkedIn Live, and we'll see about trying to get them answered. If you want to take screenshots, cool. We're not going to take this deck and put it somewhere. What's really important here is the context in all of this. So we just want you to soak this in, maybe jot some notes, but please don't feel as though that you have to be like so locked in. There'll be a replay, there'll be takeaways, but the context is important. So, we're not just going to throw the deck out there because David will have a lot of important context there. So we are going to bring this bad boy up, and there we go. So David, I'm going to let you take it from here, man.
All right. So we're going to get moving. Like Doug said, drop your comments, your questions into the LinkedIn chat. I will do my best. Doug will help me keep an eye on those. But we're going to move kind of quickly because as always, I put way too much in here. But like Doug mentioned, if you see a slide with a bunch of text on it, just take a screenshot, look at it later. Don't feel like you have to write it all down. And then because I'll probably be moving somewhat quickly through some of these. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so where did I go through? I'm not going to give you a big long bio. Just want you to understand that I do have some experience mostly in journalism, but also in marketing. I spent 6 years in newspapers before moving into the ad agency world. I worked for 7 years at a full service ad agency here in Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm based. Lucky & Company was the name of the agency, where I started out as a copywriter and I ended up becoming a VP of digital content. So I spent a lot of time thinking about headlines, about packaging, and obviously my journalism training and degree did help with that. That said, I think I learned more from just being a copywriter. No one has it harder for headline writing, no matter how much journalists may think we had a rough. Copywriters really have the hardest because you're going to live and die by the headline. So it's a really tremendous skill, and I really value what you learn from copywriting and how it improves your headline writing. I spent 15 years in total writing and editing for Adweek. About 7 of that was freelance. The rest was full time. I think I had a bunch of different jobs there. My last role was international editor, but I oversaw creative coverage and a few other different jobs there. And for the past year, I've been co-running a nonprofit with Deanna Dorsey, our CEO, and Ryan Reynolds, the famed actor and business person, called The Creative Ladder. We help recruit and train more diverse talent into creative industries like marketing. You can check it out at creativeladder.org if you want to learn more. So let's get into it. What makes an effective headline? How are we going to define whether a headline is good or bad? And the answer is it's effective. What does effective mean? That's it achieves your goal. Your goal is probably for people to take a look at the actual content, for it to either click through or to somehow pursue the content further and digest everything beyond the headline. And to do that, we got to think about what defines one being effective versus what makes it just kind of drift into the haze of things that are overlooked. To me, this is just this list actually changes in my head every few years, but I think generally the message is the same. A good headline has to be clear. If it's muddled in any way, it's not going to work. So it's got to be clear. And I did not intend to set out with like 5 C's. I know every trainer loves to have here's my 3 C's, my whatever. This is unintentional, but they should be clear, compelling, compact, clever, conversational, and then breaking the C format, willing to take a strong stance. And then responsible. What I mean by responsible is that it is really easy to get lazy with headline writing and then to not, to just do wrong by people, to do wrong by the story or the content that you're trying to summarize. If you really have to have a certain kind of weight of, I need to make sure I'm accurately and responsibly portraying this content while also making it all these other things. It's a challenge. It's why we're here to talk about it. So conversely, what's a bad headline? It's convoluted and jargony. I hate jargon. I hate anytime you're using a word that you at some point had to be trained what the word even meant in a workplace, unless it's really niche and you're just using shorthand. In general, though, I think jargon's just it's a way around having to be clear. A bad headline tries to pack the entire article into one sentence, one headline. You can't do that. You can't get all the nuance of an entire article in one headline. It's really about highlighting again, it's like packaging on a product. You wouldn't expect a product's package to just list every single feature, everything good about it. You cherry pick the best thing. What is the best thing about this product? And then that's what you want to feature. Clever, as any writer who's had to work for me, which I apologize for that experience, can probably attest. One of the things I come down the hardest on is people trying to be too clever. Wordplay, jokes, in-jokes, trying to be, I don't know, make references that are too niche or too deep of a cut. I get it. It's clever. We can all pat ourselves on the back for, how smart we are and how aware we are of pop culture, whatever. But if it doesn't serve the reader, if it doesn't serve the content, then it's too clever and it's not clear. You obviously don't want your headline to be vanilla and boring because people will just overlook it. You don't want it to be obvious, which we'll talk about in a second, of just something that makes you be like, okay, yes, I'm aware of this fact. And you don't want a headline that's lacking in nuance and thoughtfulness. Again, that gets back to responsibility. You don't ever want to, whatever your job, you don't want to, if you're writing a headline for someone else's content, you don't want them to ever look at your headline and be like, that's not what I wrote. And that's what a lot of journalists have gone through, but a lot of content creators go through too, is that you don't want the packaging to be out of sync with the tone and the message that you're trying to convey in the content. And then a bad headline is typically written in isolation. That means a lot of different things. It means trying to do it all yourself, trying to do it all, at the last second, and just compartmentalizing it all within your own brain. Talk to people, workshop it, ask an AI. There's a lot of ways you can turn it into a collaborative process, but you don't want it to just be something that you write with really no thought of who else could be weighing in to help shape this. So the question used to be, what will make them click? Obviously, that was kind of the old school journalism and content thing, is we got to get them clicks. The question became, what will make them share, right? So it's nice when they click. That's a sign that you sparked curiosity. But again, if you spark curiosity and they don't feel fulfilled when they get there, if you have a very high bounce rate, if you have a very low time on site, but even if you had great click-throughs from your subject line, your headlines, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today does carry over to subject lines, which is its own beast, but I do think there's a lot of parallels between the two. Sharing is a sign that you've created value, right? So if someone not only clicks through, reads the content you've created, but then voluntarily shares it with their networks, with their peers, that is a sign you've created real value and not just fleeting kind of curiosity or just a clickable headline. So let's talk about what prioritizes value in a headline. And I know this is a good point to stop and say that some people get really, they're polite about it, but they get understandably upset when they're like, oh, this is just going to be a philosophical presentation about headline writing, subjective, what makes good content. What about data? What about keywords? What about metadata and scalable best practices? I love all those things. That is not what we're here to talk about, because those things, there are entire experts in this. There are entire SEO plugins for this. I'm not going to try to replicate those in one talk. But yes, best practices are great. It's really good to identify them, not just for the industry, but for your own platform, whatever that may be. If you're creating content for a specific site or whatever it is, or even like a video platform, what do you name your content? If you have a podcast, what do you name your episodes? There are best practices for those, but they change. They change as the platforms change, as your audience changes, or what kind of specific audience you have. Lots of other factors. The specs are important, but they don't matter as much if you can't figure out what makes a good headline in the first place. Knowing, oh, it needs to be 40 characters doesn't really help you if you have no idea what those 40 characters should encapsulate. So that's kind of where I fall on the data versus content. That said, let's talk about data for a quick second, because yes, it's really a great way. And if you are creating content on a platform where you can go back and look at historical data, even like a year's worth of data or whatever, if you're starting from scratch, okay, yes, just experiment, have fun, try to create really compelling content. If you are at a platform that's been creating content for a while, really ask around to find the data. It can be harder than it should be sometimes to find that data. You really have to sometimes find a friend in the analytics department of your company, or your wherever, to get that data. If you're pushing all of your content out to a third-party platform, sometimes it can be impossible. But do whatever you can to look at the data that's unique to the content you're pushing out. So I give a quick example on the side here. This is from a few years ago. But when I was an editor at Adweek, I wanted to see, okay, what is the length of headline that actually generates the most page views? What kind of, is there a trend? Are 150 character headlines terrible? Is no one clicking on them? And so what you can see on the array here of how many people were clicking on each one is the top chart is the entire site. So basically you can see, okay, 60 to 80 characters up to 90 characters seems to be the sweet spot, or where most of the traffic is taking place. Few exceptions on the low end, few exceptions on the high end. But your meat is happening around the 90, 70 to 90 character mark. Okay, cool. But that's an entire website packed with tons of content. So I was like, well, I'm the creative editor, at this time. Are there trends specific to my subset, to my section of the site? And the answer, as you see below, is very clearly yes. That we had this spike around 40 characters, like 45 characters, and then again around 80 characters, and then a steep drop off as you got past 90, 95 characters. Great. I use this to basically say, okay, we've got two templates of headlines, a 40 character and an 80. So if your headline is the best ads of 2022, that's really tight, 40 characters. Boom. It's going to be a pretty big reach. And then why is there a gap in between? No idea. Is it a search thing? Is it an algorithmic thing? Is it a human nature thing? I don't know. I'm not here to parse the data so much as just to say like, hey, headlines at 40 and 85 seem to be good. So find that data for yourself. If you can't get that kind of data, look at subject line data for emails that your company is sending out. Chances are the audience is the same. So you can it's generally very easy to find not just the open rates on email, but also the click-through rates, so that you can kind of get a sense of which ones are actually working, which ones are bringing people in and keeping them there. And really, this is probably obvious in 2023. This used to be a harder thing to really kind of to get people thinking about, is that the headline that is displayed on a website is not necessarily the headline that people click on, right? Because you've got your share headline, your SEO headline, whatever you want to call it, that is the one that comes up on search, the one that comes up on social, the one that's embedded or that's like, that you see as part of your packaging online. You got to make sure that you're analyzing that. Because if you just look at your display headline, you may not be learning anything. You really got to make sure that the data is specific to the versions of headlines. Those may be the same headline. That's great. That's a best case scenario where your share headlines and your display headlines are exactly the same. In reality, sometimes it's nice to have that playground of the longer headlines. So there's my throw around data. The other biggest thing that's changed, of course, in recent years is AI. What about AI? Does it help with headline writing? Yeah, it helps a lot. It helps a lot with everything. Your mileage will vary with AI. I'm a subscriber to ChatGPT, so I get access to whatever it is, the 4.0, the 3.5 and 4.0. They're good. I will say I spend just as much time editing the suggestions it kicks out for content, for articles, for whatever, anything I ask it to generate. I'm going to spend just as much time editing that as I would just writing it from scratch. But what I'm getting is another set of perspectives. So I can ask it, how would you write a 40-character headline for an article about this that's for this kind of audience? See what ChatGPT comes back with. Odds that it'll be perfect and that it'll match everything else in this deck, slim. But it's a great place to start. I used to just sit there, and I still do sometimes, just sit there writing like 50 headlines. Any copywriter knows that little dance. It's nice to have an AI that can just kind of do that starting point for you. And as you learn more about your length, your tone, and all that, and you feed that in, you make better prompts, you'll get better headlines out of AI. So yeah, I love them. They're great. They're rarely going to create your finished product for you, but it's a bit like having a staff writer or junior writer trying to like kind of give you a head start. I did ask, by the way, what ChatGPT thought I should name this one. I won't like dig through all of these, but this presentation, it's just always fun, right? To see like, what would you call it? I kind of love and kind of hate all of these. I didn't put a length describe, just told it what the presentation was. What would you call it? But I do like the science and art of headline mastery. I don't think I would quite have the ego to say that that's what you're going to get out of these. But anyway, so just to give you a sense of what does ChatGPT come back with? It's all right. It's interesting. Okay. But let's get back to the human side of headline writing, which the recurring theme, all you need to walk away with from this entire talk is what's in it for the reader. Set yourself and your own needs, not to say entirely aside, but prioritize the needs of the reader, the needs of the content consumer, however you want to frame that. That sounds easy to some people. If you've spent a lot of time creating digital content, creating content for a brand, honestly, doing any kind of headline writing, it's a challenge. The content that a brand or company or whoever wants you putting out, if you're on the branded content side, may not align at all with what your readers and your audience want, because it's like, hey, we just acquired X company. Let's put out an article, a blog post, a release about it. And the headline could very easily just be business X acquires business Y. And it's like, all right, what is in that for me? Is like, why would I read that? That's the challenge for you as the headline writer. And sometimes it requires pushing back on some, preconceived notions of the people that you're working with. It's harder than it sounds, right? Like it does require the willingness to really go back to the content creators or the higher ups and say like, I don't know, because sometimes the easy thing is to say, I don't want to fight this fight. I'm just going to like put out the content that they've asked me to put out. And then the content does not perform. And two things happen. One, maybe you feel good about being right that the content didn't work, but more likely they're going to blame you because you were the one in charge of putting the content out. And they were like, obviously the press release about the acquisition was perfect. So it must have been the way that you packaged it that is the reason only 7 people clicked on it and all 7 of them work here. No, like you've got to, for self-preservation alone, have those conversations. And if they fight you on it, they at least know which side you were on and that you pushed for something more compelling. But it's better to have fought that and lost it than to be blamed when super boring content does what super boring content always does, which is nothing. So a good headline will never make the reader say one of these 3 things. Good for them, no shit, and so. And what I mean for that is good for them is just, again, business Y acquires business X. Good for them. Good for everyone who owns stock in those companies. Like, what does this mean? What is the value to anyone else reading this? If someone gets promoted and you want to write a blog post, you want to write an article, whatever, about this person being named EVP. Okay. Why does it matter to anyone except that person and their parents? You don't want the reader to just see the headline and say, good for them, and move on. They're not going to click it. There's absolutely no reason to click that article because everything's in the headline, unless you're, again, a shareholder or whatever, in which case you've probably already read all that. No shit. It's just the easiest thing to write. Very obvious headlines. It can be something like, you see these articles about Netflix or whatever and say like, well, people are moving away from Netflix, but you'd see these headlines for a long time. They're like, cord cutting is happening at record pace, at a record pace. And it's like, yeah, we all know that. I'm not going to read an article that says something that is so obvious to me. You have to find the thing in there that's going to make someone be like, oh, well, I'm aware of that situation. But it's like, I saw an article yesterday. I'm like literally staring out in my backyard. I got all these like pollinator gardens. Like, we're really into pollinator gardening and for, bees and butterflies and all this stuff. It's nerdy. We'll talk about it later if you want to. But I saw an article yesterday about like honeybees are not endangered. Here's why everyone thinks they are. And it was a fascinating read about the difference between native bee populations, which are endangered, the realities of the honeybee population. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is a topic where I'm like very into it, but did not know this level of detail. So if it had just said bees are struggling, I would have been like, yeah, no shit. We've been seeing that for years and years, and I'm trying to do something about it. Great job on that packaging to make me be like, oh, there's nuance to this. And then the third one is that's like okay, this just doesn't mean anything. Like why does this matter at all? What is the impact, the context? Like, why should I even care about this thing? This is something I'm a former political reporter. I'd tell you, political reporters are the worst at this. Like, because we're just like, what? Don't you care? Don't you care that this is happening? No, sometimes you got to like give people the why it matters. So that's your basic list. You have to convey value to the reader, and that starts by asking, what is the value in my content? And again, sometimes that requires a hard reality of going back to either the people who created it or the people who greenlit it and saying, like, asking that question, what is the value to anyone else? We know the value to us as a company. We know the value to the people who pitch this story to us. If you're a journalist, what's the value in the content for everyone else? You want to highlight how reading this, consuming this content, whatever it is, will make you feel smarter, inspired, more effective at your job or at whatever it is you do. That said, it's really easy when you're thinking about, oh, this article is going to make you more informed, and then to just give them the bowl of dry oatmeal, right? It is, it's, if you take it too far, if you take away entertainment, if you take away engagement, and you just try to be informative, like even scientific journals don't write headlines like this anymore. You've got to give people a little hook that makes it feel like, oh, I see what they did there. That's really clever. I'm going to like try to learn more versus just like eat your damn oatmeal. So to me, the key is just being conversational. I will quickly go off on a minor tangent about internet lingo. And I'm in my mid 40s, so I'm long past being relevant in any way whatsoever. But I will say that it is so tempting to use internet lingo in headlines, in social content, of course. But like, and especially if you are a person who unironically uses that language in your day-to-day life, it can be good, but it also, nothing changes faster than internet lingo. And as we all know, whatever is like the expression everyone uses right now, a year from now will just be cringy. Apologies if cringy is already cringy. But like, it's not going to age well. That's okay if you expect this content to only live within this fleeting moment, the equivalent of like an Insta story or whatever. But if you want this content to stick around and be somewhat evergreen, then you got to be mindful of like, what internet lingo am I using in here? And do I really think people are going to be using this phrase, this expression a year from now? Because it is hilarious to go back and look at, content even from the early 2000s when this really became a key aspect of headline writing, thanks to your BuzzFeeds and Gawkers. And man, some of it's embarrassing. But it worked in the moment. It just takes away some of your timeliness. That said, certain aspects of conversationality are evergreen. I'm just going to quickly shout out a lot of the examples we're going to look at today are either my own or from Adweek, because I was in the I was in the sausage factory of how those headlines got made, and so I can answer questions about them. I know like what was the challenge, what were we trying to accomplish with those headlines. I wanted to quickly give a shout out to the Washington Post, which I think has just mastered this art of conversationally educational headlines, especially for whatever reason when it involves animals. Part of me thinks that this Alyssa Fowers, who I don't know, but who is one of the writers here, seems to be a recurring element of like the high quality of these things. But which birds are the biggest jerks at the feeder? A massive data analysis reveals the answers. I just love the phrase biggest jerks when you're talking about animals, because we all know exactly what that means, whether you're a big bird person or not. But this is not an article about what, if it were BuzzFeed, it'd be like 5 jerk moves or 47 jerk moves that birds do. No, this is an article about why do birds behave the way they do? Why are some super aggressive? Why do some get along and others don't? Does that really apply to your everyday life? I don't know. If you have a bird feeder, it might. Like, I'm such a dork. I have one of these AI cameras that identifies the bird. I should really stop talking about what a nerd I am. But like, I loved this article, and it was just such a great way to introduce it. Of like, biggest jerks is just great packaging. And of course, like one of the real hallmarks of the Washington Post's animal coverage every year is their coverage of Fat Bear Week, which is the national park that does this every year, is just puts it up for vote. They started doing this because fans just loved the content of these pictures of these bears getting ready for hibernation, and it turned into Fat Bear Week, and the Washington Post started covering it. I'm sure other outlets have covered it too, but man, they just do such great content. And you could have asked me 2 years ago, like, hey, are you really curious about fat bears? And I would have been like, no, that has no. I'm so obsessed with these bears now and with all the coverage of it. And I love this article of just how fat are the bears. Now, they could have done this all science journalism, and it's a great read. It's a great read. They could have just gone all like what are the proportions? How does a bear compare to, no, like they're just, how fat are these bears? This is not a headline, but I just got to show you. Illustrations are just next level. They did all these comparisons of like how big would this bear look holding a teddy bear and lying in a king size mattress. The comparison of the human that the bear is standing next to is literally the writer who wrote the article. I think it's Alyssa Fowers again. And then how big would the bear be sitting in an airline row? This is just high quality journalism, and I applaud it. So again, going back to that, did they pay off the headline? Absolutely, they paid off the headline. So big fan of what the Post is doing on the animal front. Going back to one, I wrote this. Bless is of course like a bit of internet lingo. This article is from quite a while ago now, 2018. But I remember that my first headlines for the story, it was just about a simple thing where a designer was like, I want to figure out what font every logo uses. If you're a font dork and design dork, like this is a really fun story. But what I loved about it is I could have just done here are 27 logos showing the font that they were made from. Okay, yeah, that works. But what I loved about this story is that one designer made this their personal mission. And so I just like instinctively, the way I when I forced myself to rewrite the headline to be a little more interesting, I just defaulted to bless this designer for remaking famous logos to teach us which fonts they use. And it just like, because I really appreciate that as a reader, as someone who found that project, I was like, really love that this person took the time to do that. So I made that the focus and tried to keep it conversational. I could have 100 slides in this. This is my favorite category, but I'll keep it slim. It's just don't mince words. What I mean by that is like, it's really natural to not just say what needs to be said or what the article is really trying to say, and instead to like put all this padding around it to try to like, unless like, I'm assuming if you're watching this, you've written headlines, you've had to create content. And so you may know this challenge, but I think a lot of people outside of it may not, which is that it's scary when a headline is too good. Like part of you is just like almost worried that too many people will read it. It's a hard thing to describe because it sounds so counterintuitive, but it is really possible to be like, if I make that headline that good, like that compelling, it might get too big and I might hear, and you got to just fight as long as it's accurate. Again, as long as it's not clickbait, and that's you're selling an accurate headline. You got to just fight down that fear. And I doubt I'm even like really expressing it well. Let me know in the comments if you have any idea what I'm talking about. But like, it is just sometimes you just fly too close to the sun on some of these, and you're just like, is that okay? But if that is what the article is, great. So say what needs to be said. We did a lot of things about logo redesigns at Adweek, and this was a roundup of one of the batches. There's just 5 brand logo redesigns that pissed people off. Like, we could have packaged it in a million different ways, but the reality is just like, yeah, these are the ones that everyone hated. And instead of like, 5 examples of when brands attempted to blah, 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 but instead found a negative reaction. Like, no, it just pissed people off to say it. One of my favorite articles I ever got to write, what a great job this was. A brief history of Sexy Colonel Sanders. Wieden+Kennedy and KFC had done a whole range of what I would describe as the Sexy Colonel Sanders oeuvre, and it all kind of tipped over. Like, it seemed to kind of come into the public zeitgeist at one time, but they had actually been doing this for quite a while, and only like advertising nerds like me had really been paying attention to it. And so I did a deep dive into why is this old white guy in glasses, like, why is he a sex symbol who's been dead for years? And in the end, like, this, I think, was the first headline I ever wrote on it. And then I tried writing a bunch of different ones that really convey the answers, the reasons. Why is it? And in the end, you either care about a brief history of Sexy Colonel Sanders or you don't. There's no, like, I could dress it up in a million different ways, but in the end, it felt like just play it straight. And it was a big hit. People love the story. And so when in doubt, I always just found that if you just roll the ball right down the middle and just say what you're trying to say, that's a really good starting point. Then you can decide, is this boring? But chances are, if the article's good, if the art's good, if the content is good, and you can just be straightforward about, here it is and here's what it does. This one gets a little more esoteric, but you've made it this far into the talk, hopefully. So maybe you understand like kind of what I'm getting at, which is that the more specific you can be, the more time you spend picking the perfect word, finding the one detail in a story, even if it's not at the top of the story. You'll notice that like the New York Times and a lot of these, like, they really excel at this because they treat every aspect of the story as super important. And so they'll find one detail, and then maybe that's not the lead, but it's in the story and it highlights why you're writing about this. What is this content about? I love superlatives. I love featuring, why is this the biggest, the best? Why should you care? Why should you care about this case study of what you're reading about? And sometimes that requires, being subjective and being willing to go out on a limb. Just do it. If you're writing about it, if you're making content around it, chances are it's pretty good. So I threw in a few examples, but this is one where I think a lot of good headlines do this. This is one I wrote quite a while back, but as you can tell, because we're already past John Wick 4. But I interviewed the creator of a John Wick poster that was just gorgeous poster. Artist's name is Bill Ellis. And I found it in their marketing stuff, and I was just like, this is beautiful. This is not like any other movie poster that comes across the desk. And so who named it one of the best in years? I did, because I'm the one writing the story, but it's fantastic. No one questioned it. No one's like, that's not one of the best in years. We put that superlative in there to give a sense of why should I care if I'm not a fan of John Wick 3 or of movie posters? What can I learn about it? And what you can learn is like the process of how this artist was inspired to create it. What was the process? What was it like working with a movie studio? I found it to be a fascinating conversation. Hopefully it was a fascinating read for people, but it did very well. It was a really popular piece. And I think what made it was that end of that headline, one of the best in years. If we had not added that, if we had not kind of gone out on a limb with a bit of a superlative, then I don't think as many people would have cared, because it's like the story behind this John Wick movie poster. Okay, I don't care about John Wick movie posters. I do care about posters in general because they're cool. And so, we leaned into it. Okay, so this is one of my favorite interviews that I ever did. For those of you who are not British, you may not have heard of this one, but KFC ran out of chicken in the UK. It was it's funny, but it was a huge business problem for them. It was, really derailed their very large, very rapid growth in the UK market. And so Mother London put out this ad that just said FCK on the bucket. And then it was a print ad. And underneath that, it just said something like, "We're sorry." So it just had like, "Fuck, we're sorry." And so I interviewed the head of marketing for KFC UK and asked her, "How was this originally pitched to you?" And she said, or I said, "How did you respond when they first floated this idea to you?" And she said, "I think I said, 'You want me to write fuck on a bucket?'" And that I was like, that's too good of a headline, too good of a quote. I have to use it in the headline. But also because it really does convey this, like, ever since I saw that, I was like, what did the client say? What was the reaction? Because the client is not probably in the mood for a joke right now. They're in like their worst crisis moment. And you come to me like, "I think we should take our logo and spell fuck with it." And then like, I had to know, what is the reaction? What is it like? This was a huge hit of a campaign for them. People loved it. It's a huge hit of an article for me. It was the most read piece of content from this year of Cannes Lions, which is a big thing for Adweek. But it continued to get a lot of reads. I just like, when you take an interview and you try to compact it into a headline, it's a challenge. It's really challenging because interviews typically don't have one central thing. They kind of go in a bunch of different places. So the superlative here, the reason that I picked it out in this category is because we talk about it became a print ad for the ages. This thing won a ton of awards, but just again, subjectively, as a journalist, as the person writing about this, it's like, yeah, it is a print ad for the ages. Do I quote some historian saying that? No. It's me, just using your own judgment, not mincing words. It is a print ad for the ages. And that is why we're doing this interview. And I got to use "You want me to write fuck on a bucket" in a headline, which made me very happy. And people loved it. This one was another kind of popular read, which I'm glad, because it took a while to write this one. But it was how a 46-person agency managed to create 3 of the year's biggest Super Bowl ads. The agency was David Miami. The key there, the whole reason that anyone would care about this story, 46-person agency. If you haven't worked in ad agencies, let me tell you, that's small. It's a small agency. The one I worked at is not, extremely well known, and we had like 120 people. So 46 people creating 3 Super Bowl ads, much less 3 big Super Bowl ads, like ones that people really noticed and weren't like, just small things. Big deal. And we really wanted to find out literally how did a team that small do it? And so to me, this headline would have been good, but I think putting the 46 person in there, that level of granularity, made it to where anyone could look at that and be like, yeah, if you had a headline, how one agency made 3 of the biggest ads, well, you're going to assume they have 500 people or 1,000 people. They have 46. That's kind of interesting. So one thing I always love is if you can write a headline. These are rare. They're beautiful. I want you all to keep an eye out for them. I want you to let us know if you've written any of these, because they're fantastic. Is to craft a mystery that can only be solved by reading. And I felt bad because I feel like I've read so many good long reads, like these really good kind of deep dive stories where like the headline is just this, you're like, I have to know what, this person said they're going to do this and then vanished. I love those stories. It's certainly a trope of crime fiction, not crime fiction, but of true crime. But anyone can do this. And it reminds me how much our former colleague at Adweek, Tim Nudd, who's now at Ad Age, is a longtime creative editor. He was the master of this, could just write such a good mystery headline. He wrote one. I don't have it in this deck just because it's getting quite old now. It's from like 2007 or 8. But about this mysterious job interview that ended up being not at all what people expected. And it was this and it got millions and millions of page views on a site that, would 100,000 would be a hit, a runaway hit story, got millions of page views. And it wasn't clickbait because everything was paid off. You click through and you learn what the job interview was. It was from MullenLowe. It was fantastic piece, millions of page views. That was the most read story probably in the history of the site. And it was because it crafted a mystery. I really should have ignored the date and just put that one back in. But anyway, it's hopefully you get a sense of it. Here's another one that Tim did, how a hidden design flaw makes the Starbucks logo look perfect. In some ways, it's not about, have you noticed this one hidden design flaw? That would be a clickbait headline because you click through and you see it and you're like, oh, okay. And spoiler alert, it's like the kind of the edge of the mermaid's nose there and how it's not symmetrical. That's it. But it's a great read, and there's a lot more than that. It's not about it's not a Where's Waldo thing. It's like why does that do that? So yes, where is the hidden, lack of symmetry? But also why? Why does that work? Great little marketing mystery compacted into a nice headline. This one was one, I wouldn't say I intended it to be a mystery, but I did think it was a tough headline to write. So you may have heard about when Pabst Blue Ribbon tweeted about, hey, this, instead of dry January, you should try eating ass. Didn't go over great. And the person behind the tweet got fired. I knew the person behind it. He gave me an interview, said at the time, and I think he's held true to this, that it was the only interview he was going to do about it, period. But we sat down, we talked for a long time about it. And what was fascinating is he wasn't one of those people who was like, I did what I did and like, screw them for not being cool. No, it was not like that at all. Like he really had learned something, and not just like, I regret getting fired. What he regretted was finding out that the things he did as a silly, writer of social content that, is read by beer fans, has implications for other people, the people working in the accounting office, the people working in the warehouses. And that he was like, I embarrassed them. I made them like feel uncomfortable about being part of a company that they had worked for in some cases for decades. And he's like, that is going to weigh on me forever. And it was very sincere. This was not someone making excuses, but he learned the hard way to like, this isn't just silly fun stuff, that it does have implications beyond just losing your job. So when I wrote that into it, that's a tough headline to write. And so maybe it's a bit of a, teasery thing here, but I just wanted to say that that's not the part he regrets most. I could have just said, I guess, ass eating tweet, left man with regret. I don't know. There's other ways you could package it, but to me, this felt like the best way to convey what was really happening here. So, and then when in doubt, this gets into copywriting stuff. But you got to talk about symmetrical sentences. Symmetrical sentences are so powerful. If you do know what I'm talking about, you've probably like done a bunch of these if you're a copywriter. Otherwise, here's some examples. How to murder your husband, author sentenced to life in prison for murdering husband. They just have this like flow, right? A lot of copywriting does this. It's just like it comes right back to where it started. Officials hope to capture loose zebras with a new plan involving even more zebras. I'm a big fan of like headline humor that just reproduces the same word a bunch. How does zebra plan fight zebras? By bringing more zebras to the zebras, anything like that. I'm always a fan of that. But play with symmetry. It works in journalism. It works in advertising. It works in all forms of content. It is just something that's so natural about people just gravitate to it. And I did want to touch on clever wordplay, because a lot of people, especially journalists, but honestly, everybody's like, what if I'm having fun with it? What am I? Okay. Yes, wordplay can be really clever. It can be really fun. But it's got to be brilliant. And so like the bar is high. And so as Zenger like mentions in the overlay, like he is, everyone wants to do wordplay, but I had to be the bad guy a lot of times as an editor and be like,
yeah, you did. This is where I come in now.
So like my thing is, if you're going to do that, it's got to be so good, and it's got to be something that enough people get. New York Times weirdly has like a specific skill set of turning songs into obscure animal headlines. Started out as a fish. How did it end up like this? Is a really fantastic read about this evolving animal. And then when an eel climbs a ramp to eat squid from a clamp, that's amore. Like I almost thought about having you sing it, Doug, but I was afraid you'd milk it for way too long. And then, so yeah, that's the bar if you're going to get into wordplay. So in short, just to wrap up everything, be clear before being clever. You can be clever and clear, great. But always be clear first. Focus on the value to the reader above all and above everything. Balance data with experimentation. Don't just say like, we have analyzed the data and we have found this. Okay, that won't last forever. That'll last like 3 months. You got to keep analyzing, keep looking, keep balancing, keep experimenting. Otherwise, you will just fall into this. Like, go back and read some 2007 articles about, headlines or about keywords, and see how laughably, out of date all that stuff is. You got to keep changing. Pinpoint those details that make the content unique, informative, numbers, superlatives, like anything that's a great quote, whatever is unique to your content. Don't shy away from that. Put it front and center. Try to build headlines around that. Be blunt with yourself about what I click on this headline. And then sometimes be okay with the fact that this process can spot weaknesses in content and that's good. Like if it doesn't make for easy conversations, it can make for really awkward conversations, but it's a good thing when you're in the process of writing a headline and you realize like this article doesn't have value or this piece doesn't have the kind of value that I really need to build a headline around. Well, if you've got the time, which is saying a lot, like go back and try to see if you can break it into two pieces, do something that makes it more compelling content. So those are the kind of final thoughts for me. If you want to hit me up, I'm just david@creativeladder.org or here on LinkedIn, easy to find. But yeah, that's it. That's it for me. Good, sir.
Anybody have any questions? If I'm just seeing, there were a lot of questions that, well, a lot of comments, a lot of people giving you high fives, deservedly so. No, it's great. And I think what's really important is seeing it in action, right? Because I think that anytime that you look at this, especially headline writing, and you put it into this theoretical perspective, but being able to give these very specific examples really helps illuminate it. But the thing about this too is it is such a competitive space. I mean, it's competitive. There's noise and then there's signal. So using a headline to create a genuine and unique signal, probably more important than ever, I would say.
I feel like the biggest mistake people make is just thinking there is an answer, that this is a great headline. And it has changed so much even within like the time we were at Adweek. Like every year, those things would change. And the key is just to be open to evolving yourself, your organization, and just say like, well, this used to work, but this isn't working now. Be willing to push back if someone comes to you, especially a consultant. They love to do this. No offense, consultants, but like to come back and say, you should always be doing this. If anyone says you should always be doing this, and then they can't cite something more recent than like 2016, maybe like ask them for more recent data, because this stuff's so fluid. And it's just, in the end, what's nice about headlines is like 9 times out of 10, you can tell if they're working. Like,
right.
No, you can look at the numbers.
Right. No, that's very, very, very true. I don't think I have anything else. I think this was great. And so glad that you dusted this off, because I remember that when we did this internally at Adweek, it's just great. It's great. And to be able to see the practical application to not just journalism, but to content, if you're working for a brand, if you're working for an agency on behalf of a brand, or your own agency for that matter, because we are an agency site. But I think that it is really, that stuff is evergreen. Even though things will change in terms of how it manifests, the concept of it remains the same. And
I hope these takeaways apply to whatever kind of content you create, whether it's like one-to-one of like headlines, podcast titles, like whatever you create, whatever titles you put on things, this level of thinking applies to all of it. And it was nice working at somewhere like Adweek, where we put out a million different kinds of content, video, audio, presentations, speeches, like seeing what topics do people turn out for a panel on, all of that, it comes down to the same thinking process. So I hope it was helpful.
Great. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us. We'll tap into you for other stuff. I know that there was certainly a wellspring of requests for some nerdy stuff. So we'll think about.
Yeah, we'll dig deep in pollinators and AI identifying bird apps.
I kind of like that. As always, thank you so much. Really appreciate not just sharing today, but appreciate your leadership in the industry space. And you're my man.
Oh, thanks, buddy. It's good seeing you.
All right, man. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. As a reminder, go to indieagency.news. Thank you again to our corporate and individual members. The more members we get, the more we can do together. We are building the global home for independent agencies on behalf of all 2 of us at Indie Agency News. We'll see you next time.